Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is what Christmas means to reflective thinkers, by Manly P. Hall. An article taken from Horizon, the Magazine of Useful and Intelligent Living, Volume 5, Number 3, Winter, 1945. To the degree that we can give unselfishly and intelligently, to that degree we are proving the evolution of our divine nature. What Christmas Means to Reflective Thinkers, by Manly P. Hall. There is no myth nor legend that has become more set in our minds and hearts than the story of Santa Claus. There is something about this story that intrigues young and old. We are never too old to be touched by this quaint and beautiful fable. Today, unfortunately, we have commercialized the idea so completely that a large part of its charm has gone, and we look forward with some apprehension to the coming of the Christmas season. And still, in spite of sore effect and last-minute excitement and nervousness, we would not like to give up this belief in the spirit of giving and sharing. Now, where did this idea come from originally? It came out of the human being. It is part of our own natures. Everything we have created in the outside world is part of ourselves. There is no institution, no tradition, no art nor science, no philosophy nor invention that did not originate within us as an impulse of basic character. The reason why we enjoy this spirit of Christmas cheer is because it is part of our own internal nature. There is something within us that has demanded this release. And as a result of that fact, the festival is by no means limited to Christendom. Its date may vary with different people, and the philosophy underlying it, the explanation for it, differs with different generations of various races. But there is no people in the world that has not the equivalent of what we term Christmas. We have related it to the story of our own Christian faith. Other people have done the same thing with their story, but always somewhere in the philosophy, religion, or idealism of civilized nations, and also of primitive people, is this belief in the dignity and importance of secret giving. This belief that in some way we share in a larger consciousness with the expression of a basic emotion of our own. If we go back to the pre-economic years of our own civilization, we realize that Christmas was something the European peasant looked forward to throughout the whole period of the year. In olden times, nearly all gifts were made by those who gave them. The carpenter worked in his shop at odd moments to make toys, to create various things for his friends. The shoemaker would slyly make an extra pair of shoes as a gift and hide them until the Christmas season. It was in those times that Christmas meant the most because it represented a benevolent conspiracy carried on throughout the year. The observant individual listened carefully to the wishes of his friends and learned one wanted a small box to keep something in, so he went to work to make that box. And if he could not find an excuse to give him the box, he saved it and gave it to him on Christmas, at which time no explanation was necessary as to why he made the gift. It was just something he had held close in his own heart, planned for and enjoyed most before the actual gift itself was presented. Now this is psychological. You will find it among the most primitive people, among the Eskimos, among our own North American Indians, in China, in Egypt, in Greece, almost everywhere this spirit of giving has been cultivated and developed. People realized in the last analysis they had more pleasure from the giving than from what they received. To admit this truism in these days would be regarded as gullible, for people are ashamed of their own feelings. But Christmas is an opportunity to do many of these things, and one has the privilege at this season of the year to express convictions that are held all the time without an appropriate reason for expression except during this Yuletide period. Now, what is the basis of this? Why is the human being most happy when he is giving or sharing? The psychologist, who is a very literal-minded person and inclined to be a bit pessimistic, has the idea that the real secret behind our philanthropy is our egotism. We like to give, but most of us find it difficult to receive. The dignity of being able to receive is as great as being able to give, but is more difficult. We like to do things in a grand manner, and probably the psychologist is correct when he says that generosity is a phase of selfishness, one of its most subtle phases, but that is only part of it. It is much deeper than that. As we explore into human nature more and more, we get behind psychology and all its fixations and frustrations and find there is something particularly beautiful and calm behind all the personality equation that makes up temperament and disposition. Underneath all these things is the real human being himself, the real human being who knows the laws of life better, probably, than he can ever be taught intellectually in his outward personality. In some way, we know, as Diogenes knew in Greece, that the difference between men and gods is in one particular, and that is that men are always on the receiving end of universal benevolence, while deities are always on the giving end. Diogenes said, "The gods have proven their own divinity because they require and ask for nothing and have given all, while man proves his humanity because he gives very little and needs all." This difference between spirit and matter is a basic difference. Spirit is forever giving and matter is forever receiving. It is the difference between a positive and negative polarity. The proof of life, the proof of vitality, the proof of internal energy is animation, whereas the proof of absence of life is receptivity. Where life itself is insufficient, the forms must accept life from elsewhere. Where the forms themselves have life intrinsic to their own character, they are forever bestowing and giving. The sun, which is the universal benefactor of our world, sustains all things by the emanation of itself. The planets, less in power than the sun, are eternally receiving the benefaction of the sun. Thus, that which is innately superior proves its superiority by what it gives, from the fact that it is the source of the sustaining power of the other thing. We know finally in nature the perfect giver is spirit itself, life. Life gives all and takes nothing because there is nothing it can receive. It is constantly supporting and sustaining, but it is not sustained because it has its own eternity within itself. Wisdom in the world of intellect is forever giving, and by the very virtue of giving is strengthened. We have learned from every study of nature that there is truth in the old epitaph of the conqueror. That which I kept I lost, that which I gave I held. In nature, the symbol of superiority is unselfish giving. The symbol of greatness is intelligent giving. And the difference between the untutored generosity of mortals and the wise generosity of the gods lies in the direction of giving. Buddha was once asked the question of how we should determine the merit of generosity, how we should determine that which is the greater virtue. What is the virtue of feeding the hungry man, and how shall we determine the merit of the thing we do? Buddha replied that all generosity is meritorious, but that the measure of generosity is based upon the power of intelligence, the power of the wisdom with which the thing is done. Generosity is an impulse which is selfish if it is not directed by intelligence. The mere pleasure of giving is not the greater good. The greater good is the result of intelligent giving. Intelligent giving is extremely difficult. It is one of the greatest tests of basic wisdom that the human being can ever face. Nothing in the world is more difficult than to give something without unfortunate consequences. When Buddha was asked this question, he said, "Merit depends entirely upon perspective in the matter of giving. That the very generosity of man must be philosophized, must be rationalized, must be perfected like all other virtues in understanding and wisdom to fulfill itself." So the disciples asked Buddha the question, and he said, yes, to feed the hungry man is merit, but to feed the hungry man who, after he is fed, will feed 2 other men is greater merit, because then you have carried your action on, you have discriminated. To feed a hungry man is good, but to feed the hungry man who in turn will pass on that good to another extends the life of the merit. So Buddha went on to say, to feed the man who by being fed will plow the field and feed his family is greater merit. Therefore, feeding a lazy man is not so meritorious. It is good, but on a much lower level, the merit increases with the discrimination. Then he referred to the holy order of his philosophers. He said, to feed the man who will feed the multitude is of still greater value, but to feed the man who will solve problems is of still greater merit. And after all, in all the things we do, the greater good is the result of selectivity in the use of what we have. The use of the thing we have is the proof of our own wisdom. The individual who performs the good act has the opportunity to observe the consequences of his own motive, and he comes to some rather interesting conclusions in the course of time. One of the most common problems of generosity is disillusionment. We do all we can for somebody, And when they in turn do something unkind to us, we lose faith in God, man, and the universe. We should not do this. We should approach the matter very philosophically. We should realize two things. In the first place, we are responsible for the discrimination in the choice of those we serve. Therefore, if we serve an individual and fail to realize in the end we'll be ungrateful, it is our own failing. We have failed to recognize values. We have been generous to the wrong person. The merit remains, but not great, and the reward is not as happy for ourselves. Each of us comes into this world of opportunity, in some cases very limited, and in others very great. And this opportunity must be used or abused to constitute life. If we use it wisely, this opportunity serves others and results in what the Buddha called merit. In other words, we have built permanent values. The misuse of what we have, great or small, results in lack of merit or a failure. The supreme failure in life is misuse. And the failure is more complete if its misuse is intentional. The greatest success in life is use for the greater good. Now by giving, we come face to face with a great many forces in human nature. We realize the necessity of letting go our gift. We realize it is necessary to release our own good deed and not expect to draw interest on it for the rest of our life. So often we impoverish the recipient of our gift by presenting him with ourselves along with the gift. That is a serious mistake. It is absolutely necessary in intelligent giving that our gift be without strings, that we do not expect something in return. The ones who are disappointed are usually those who expect something. There's a sort of ulterior motive hidden away in the gift somewhere. We must detach ourselves from the things we do. Having done them, we must not regard ourselves as privileged characters from that time on, with the special right to meddle in the affairs of those we serve. That is one of the causes of disillusionment. So after all, our spirit of giving is tied up in our own divinity. The God in us is growing up in experience, and giving is a godlike deed. We are sort of experimenting with our own divine power. After all, the gods hand out innumerable virtues and powers throughout nature. The gods are eternally benevolent, eternally giving of themselves to all things, but they do it in a very astute manner, in a way that never encourages laziness or dependence, never overdoing the gift, and never failing at the critical moment. We are trying to be God. We know that somewhere within us is a divine power striving for expression, and the expression of this power is our godhood coming of age. We realize to the degree we can give, to that degree we are proving the evolution of our own divine nature. So whenever we are doing something for someone else, we are playing God, we are experimenting with deity. We are, in a mysterious way, setting apart and selecting someone or something for the object of our charity or generosity, or for the object of our affection and regard. We are going to influence and change the life of that person by something we do. We are playing God. We are answering their prayers because, after all prayers are answered by the gods through men. We are going to change his life, going to make it possible for him to have opportunity or privilege that he might not otherwise have had. We are taking on a tremendous responsibility with this, a responsibility that takes every ounce of intelligence that we possess. Suppose we are doing it for the wrong person. Not long ago, I talked with a man who had made philanthropy his profession, and he said that in his lifetime he had helped 20 young people through college. At the same time, there was one young man he did not help. The 20 he had felt sorry for at various times, he paid their bills and started them in life. He did not like the looks of the other chap. He was not as prepossessing in personality as the others. The interesting thing is that the 20 he helped through were all failures, and the one he did not help was the only successful one in the lot. That is the usual experience of philanthropy. That shows how discriminating we have to be when we play God, because this generous man with the finest intentions ruined the lives of 20 people. That is why giving is a fine art. That is why it is playing God, and why it is the one thing in the world in which superficial sentimentality must not be involved. The problem of experimenting with our ideals is very informative and very costly, and most costly to those we would help the most. A great philosopher in ancient Greece was once asked what a man could give to another. He cannot give him wisdom, cannot give him truth, cannot give him happiness, justice, or security. There is only one thing he can give him, and that is the chance to find all things for himself. That is very largely true. No matter what we do for others, we cannot make them happy, we cannot protect them from themselves, from any ignorance that has undermined their own foundation. The only thing we can do is to give them an opportunity to do something for themselves. If they do not take advantage of that opportunity, if they do not continue it afterward, that automatically proves we have made an unfortunate selection, and we are karmically responsible in nature for permitting ourselves to continue the injury by helping. So generosity, instead of being a delightful, superficial thing that can be tossed about at the pleasure of the giver, is one of the deepest responsibilities of life, something that is the greatest proof of our philosophy. It proves how much we know, how much we have learned, and how clearly we can discriminate. It is important for us to realize that as we play at this divine game of giving, there must be within us a considerable content of divinity to make it safe, secure, and reasonable. So like all our impulses, our generosity must be subjected to discipline. It must be trained not to be harmful to those whom we desire to help. It must be deepened and broadened by understanding, to give intelligently, to select the exact amount that is required to help forward the spiritual life and supply the physical necessities of others. This is one of our privileges and one of the great problems of the world. Now, generosity is of two kinds: to share what we are or what we have. In recent years, generosity is largely interpreted as sharing what we have. The economic world in which we live is the cause of this. Our external way of life has had a great deal to do with our internal impulses. As one of our great philosophers said years ago, the solution to our social problem is not generosity. Generosity is merely a temporary balm of Gilead, something to heal a sore spot, but not in any way correcting the cause of the bruise. So long as the survival of humanity depends upon the generosity of the few, the social structure is wrong. There should be no requirement in a well-structured society for the word we now use, charity. Charity is an indictment of society that it should be necessary for youth to shackle itself for an education, and old age to shackle itself for survival is an indictment of our entire social system. The system is wrong. The dignity of human life begins with the securing of human necessity for all. We will never have the right kind of world until human beings can function as the noble creation humanity really is, until we have made the security of our living a part of our philosophy of life. There is no reason why we should depend upon philanthropy for our public institutions. There is no reason why we should depend upon private charity to patch up the destructive negative consciousness of a perverted civilization. These are basic facts, and we find ourselves in a dilemma to begin with. Under existing conditions, it has to be this way, but it has changed the spirit of giving from what it should be by virtue of economic necessity, and has thrown a tremendous strain upon the discriminating power of the individual. Probably this strain is good and necessary. It is helping people to learn to use what they have, but it is not the answer to the social problem. Unfortunately, it is the giver and not the recipient who is always enriched by the gift. That is part of the natural law of life. Why should we have this tremendous internal desire to share what we have or what we know? It is unquestionably part of the fact that the consciousness of the individual only flows in one direction. Basically, if you have ever seen one of these highly volatile chemical substances that constantly emanates minute particles of life, you realize that all these particles of life are continually pouring from themselves streams of energy, just like the sun. Tremendous waves of force move from every center of life, but there is no great force moving back from matter to life. The flow is always in one direction. The flow is from the self outward, because the self is the center. Everything we do is toward the outside, and what we commonly term the flowing back to the center is merely a restarting at the center, not a motion back to it. The center of life is forever giving off its natural qualities, force and power, and it is inevitable that as we grow more highly evolved in life, we become more and more conscious of the pressure from within, the pressure which is impelling us to give of ourselves, of our energy and life, and also to a certain degree is impelling us to cast off every impediment, every weight, every burden that makes up life. In the old days, when certain metaphysical schools were very prominent, there was a term that was in use. In certain organizations, the followers believed they belonged to the spiritual aristocracy of the world, and they liked to call themselves old souls. whereas those who did not belong to that particular group came under the heading of young souls. Well, if there be an old soul in nature or a young one, certainly we can say the more advanced the consciousness becomes, the less possessive it becomes, the less it wants for itself and the more it wants to give. The individual who becomes gradually more and more wise realizes, as Aristotle said, more than enough is a burden, and the individual who has more than he needs is a servant to what he has. As we go on further, what we have becomes less and less significant, and what we are becomes more and more significant. There is a common tendency for humanity to throw off ballast. When the first hot air balloon was being developed, in order to keep it in the air, it was necessary to throw away bags of sand, and almost immediately the casualty list increased among those who were underneath. A number of people were killed by the sandbags thrown out of the balloon. That is one of the problems in the ascent of the human soul. We cast off ballast and sometimes kill the individual upon whom we have dropped the ballast. Finally, the problem in connection with the balloon was solved by making the sandbag with a drawstring. And instead of throwing the bag, they threw the sand in small amounts, not enough at one time to kill a person. That is more or less the problem of the breaking up of the possessive life of the individual. If it is done gradually, it is less likely to produce damage. It is the problem of consciousness gradually moving away from possessions toward distribution of things possessed. It realizes it must lighten its own weight in order to travel far. To travel far, we must travel light. Man traveling through space has little he can take with him but himself. Things become a burden as he travels more rapidly. So we have another factor involved when consciousness drops off things no longer used, no longer necessary and desired. As consciousness increases, values become more and more internal. The individual lives more in the joy of emanation and less in the possession of anything. As civilization evolves, it is gradually outgrowing the sense of possession. Ultimately, our world will be free of the false values of today. They have to be outgrown because we can never escape from them while we really believe in them. That is why the world has to change. Now, in our Western world, we have prided ourselves for the last 100 years on our intensely practical way of life. We have become practical to the extent of boredom. We have departed from romanticism, which is something that we have regarded as belonging to the medieval ages, to benighted times. We have decided that a romantic type of philosophy of life is a sign of adolescence. As a result, we have become what we have termed very practical, but in reality we are very childish. But we have not outgrown romance nor romantic philosophy. We have simply tried to smother it as a symbol of maturity. We have tried to follow fashions rather than the impulses of our own life. Yet the individual remains unbelievably and inevitably the romanticist. He will never be happy in any other way. The Eternal gave man three great vehicles of manifestation: his mind, his heart, and his hand. With his mind, he does things necessary for his survival. With his heart and emotions, he feels very deeply the values of life. And with his hand, he can construct the physical form of empire. But it is quite impossible to believe we can ever become intelligent human beings by the development of the mind and the complete obscuration of the heart. If it had been intended that way, we would not have been given this intense, sensitive emotional reflex so close to the liver. We are not intended to perfect ourselves in a mental way of life, and that is what is getting us into difficulty at the moment. We have ennobled the intellect, elevating it to the highest place in the world of affairs. We stand in great awe of and talk in hushed tones of great physicists, biologists, chemists, and mathematicians. We feel these great intellectual leaders are the salt of the earth. But the salt has lost most of its savor. It is not possible for us to perfect anything in life with the intellect alone, no matter how much we culture this intellect. We will find in the end there is nothing more sterile than intellectualism. Even though it be exact and precise, it is not enough. If it were, the other part of our nature would not have been put there. In our practical way of life, we have deified our intellect and made a stepchild of our human heart and all it stands for. The individual who feels intensely, who has a natural, mystical apperception of things, is called a dreamer. His products are important in some respects, but are not regarded as solutional. We are depending upon our intellect for everything that is vital and upon our emotional content, merely for secondary things. amusement, pleasure, a certain amount of aesthetic satisfaction and things of that nature. But our emotions are our luxuries, and our thoughts are our necessities. We have it all figured out. We are perfectly convinced that we are going to capture the universe by a scheme, a plot, a plan, or a conference. This entire viewpoint is unfortunate, basically. There are values in life, important values, which are just as vital to our survival as anything we can think about, which can never be touched by the power of thought, but only by the discipline and perfection of our own emotional content. Just as the mind can be trained to the most precise calculation, so the emotions in their own world and through the discipline of their own kind can be refined, organized, and integrated into a great instrument of soul power and soul discovery. There are two worlds, one of the mind and the other of the emotions. We cannot conquer the emotional sphere by mental laws, nor can we conquer the mental sphere by emotional laws. We are today beginning to examine the mental world more carefully, not only by philosophy and science, but by psychology. Just as surely as there are sciences that have to do with the potentials of thought, so surely there are arts that have to do with the potentials of emotions. These things, for the most part, we have ignored. We have not recognized the importance of trained feelings in the apperception of solutional things. One of the reasons we have this hopeless world of matter around us which we cannot break through is because we have dulled some of the strongest instruments we have by which we might be able to break through the material limitations we have imposed upon ourselves. So we are basically possessed of a powerful emotional content that has gone to seed within us, that has turned into a garden of weeds because no one has taken care of it, because we have spent all our time trying to perfect the mind. This emotional content is obvious in our traditions and obvious in our thoughts about such things as Christmas. There are very few people, in spite of their complaints, who do not enjoy Christmas. There are very few who do not enjoy the fable of Christmas. It is a part of the survival of all races. If you look around you, everywhere you turn is the ideological content for what we do. The Greeks, the Egyptians, the people of the Middle Ages had a great world of abstract ideals. They believed in a wide variety of extra-physical things. They had their gods, their demigods, their deities, nymphs, dryads, sprites, and salamanders. Fables, yes, but probably more factual than fact itself. In our process of becoming factual, we have destroyed all forms of our imagination outlet. We have denied ourselves any mythology, any legendary, any tradition beyond that of sober history. But strangely enough, history is the greatest mythology, the greatest mass of unrealities that we could possibly addict ourselves to. There is no fairy story in the world as distorted or unreal as history. We have all kinds of peculiar beliefs. Because we do not believe as older people believed does not mean we have necessarily overcome superstitions. We just have different kinds of superstitions, and unfortunately they're not pleasant ones. It might be superstitious to believe there were little spirits that lived in oak trees and shook the acorns down. It might be stupid and superstitious to believe that when we know it was only the wind that shook the acorns down. But still, it is no more stupid, no more superstitious than the belief that economics will result in happiness, because that has been disproved every time it has been experimented with. And also it is no more superstitious to believe that the Nibelungs gathered up the treasures of the earth than it is to believe that anything important will result from the recovery of the gold buried on the Atlantic seaboard. We have our superstitions, but they are different. The principal difference being they are not pleasant. The superstitions of the ancients were rather charming, happy things. They made people feel good, work harder for things that are fine, but our superstitions are all morbid. Our superstitious belief that we might find news in the morning paper, our superstitious belief in the fourth estate, resulting in our preference for the latest murders before breakfast, all these things are unpleasant and we believe in them very firmly. The belief that we can create world peace by parleys is one of the greatest superstitions in the world. The belief that we should be any further along or any happier if the various institutions we have today would intensify their procedure is a superstition. There is no greater superstition in the world than the belief that science knows everything. It does not. To deify these institutions is as great a superstition as to believe the woods could talk or the rivers sing. But our superstitions we hold in deadly earnest. We go to war over them. They cause us to hate people. They cause us to hate ourselves. We are uncomfortable and dyspeptic as a result of our fond clinging to our own fallacies. If we are going to recognize the fact that the human being must believe something, and no civilization has succeeded that has not believed in something greater than itself, and no human being can succeed who does not believe in something greater than himself. If we have to believe in something, it is obviously desirable that we should believe in something that is ennobling and constructive and that results in a higher dedication to those ends that are in themselves real. Now we can say, as Freud said, why not face the stark reality? Things are going from bad to worse. Why not face the fact that what we call religion is nothing but an escape mechanism? Why not have the courage to face the fact that the physical world is all there is, has been, or ever will be? Why deceive ourselves at all? Well, Freud had his way and his viewpoint, but his type of viewpoint never produced any really important result. In the first place, he assumed to be true that which he believed and everything else to be wrong. That is an assumption and not a fact. Mortality is just as much a theory as immortality, even from a scientific standpoint. Throughout the philosophy of history, we realize that the individual with a strong ideology is the individual who does the world work. No one is great because of unbelief. He may be smug, but not great. There is a grave question as to whether there is really such a thing as actual unbelief. A great skeptic once claimed that in his estimation, every ideal of the human race from the beginning of time was a racket. One day he did not feel very well. He became quite excited and asked his secretary to phone the local priest. The secretary nearly collapsed, but said, "What is his phone number?" The man answered, "I always keep it under the corner of my blotter in case of emergency." And I'm not sure that is not a reasonable definition of unbelief. When everything is going well, unbelief is something we can endure, but it is completely unendurable when things go wrong. There is a great question as to whether an actual atheist exists, although many say they are. If you go far enough inside the individual, you will strike a spiritual impulse because it is there. But we have departed from all the more beautiful escape mechanisms, if you want to call them that, which have helped to build great civilizations. We have an example of that right here today as a problem in our world. We have the material resources to conduct our civilization for a long time. We have the sphere of influence. We have fear. If not the love of the world, we can do almost anything we want to do as a people. Then why are we not happier, more secure, more united, more actually devoted to things that are real than any other people on earth? Simply because we lack the priceless ingredient of contentment, and that is purpose, dynamic purpose, a reason for existence. The principal power in maintaining human life over a critical period is the will to live. If an individual who is very, very ill gives up the will to live, he will die. If he holds the will to live, he usually recovers, unless the damage is so great the body cannot survive. But in many cases of serious illness, the will to live is important to recovery. If you ask the patient afterward the reason for his will to live, he will very seldom tell you it was just because he wanted to live. He will tell you he willed to live because of something. The mother willed to live because she wanted to stay with the child who needed her. The man with the profession willed to live so he could finish his job, whatever it was. The great sculptor willed to live because he wanted to finish his work. The great musician willed to live because he wanted to finish his musical composition. The will to live was always bound to a purpose, and I have never yet heard of any dying man who said he willed to live because he wanted to make more money. At that particular time, money did not look so important to him. He might will to live long enough to make a will so that he would not die intestate. There is always an overtone behind the will to live. Without that overtone, there is no reason to live. And the things for which human beings live are their ideals, their dreams, their purposes, and these are intangibles. A nation to survive must have the will to live. You cannot perpetuate a disillusioned people. You cannot perpetuate a people who are convinced within themselves there is nothing worthwhile to be gained by going on. You cannot perpetuate sophistication. You have to have the will to live. And for a people, a nation, the will to live is linked to the purpose for which they live. There must be a purpose. Without a purpose, there can be no will to live. Man differs from the brute in that particular respect. Man is the only creature who can plan a purpose and that is the basis of his will to survive. The intangible behind all tangible things is purpose, and intangible. This purpose has never yet been sufficiently attained by the intellect. Never yet has the individual been forced to the will to live merely by converting him to an idea. The will to live is powerfully geared to the emotional and sympathetic nature, and the emotions must have their place in the will to live. The emotions are perfected through the aesthetic culture of a people, through idealism, through the unselfish desires of a people. The greatest power behind the will to live is the desire to live, to serve. The greatest will is the will to survive in order to give rather than to get. The only thing that can survive is that which believes itself to be necessary to the good of something else. Take that away and you have no impulse for survival. The mother with the small child would be perfectly willing to die when in great pain, but the desire to protect her child is greater. It is her desire to give herself to her child, and that is the impulse to live, the will to go on. And this is also true of a nation. The only thing that can preserve this nation is a purposed will to survive, because this nation believes, feels, and knows that its survival is necessary to the common good. Until we get that, we cannot win the peace. We cannot win the peace without our fable, without our myth, without our superstition, if you want to call it that, without the basic belief that we have something. To give that is good, and it is that belief in the power of what we can do for another rather than that which other can do for us. That is purpose. That is the glory of life. That is the reason why the idealist emerges after thousands of years of oblivion and takes his high place among mankind. It is because of what he gives. In a nation, this emotional intangible that cannot be rationalized is present in those people who are persecuted and dies in those in whom the struggle ceases. The impulse of purpose is defeated usually by the attainment purpose. That is why Aesop, the fabulist of Greece, answered the question, "What is the great work of the gods?" by saying, "The gods devote their time to lifting up the lowly and pushing down the great. That is the vocation of the gods." But the truth of the matter is, the attainment of the purpose exhausts the will to live. The world conqueror fails after he conquers the world because, like Alexander, he has no more worlds to conquer. Therefore, if you place your goal too near, you shorten your own life. If you say, "All I have to live for is something I can get in 5 years," that is often the end of life. Very often nature steps in, giving a new incentive, thus extending the goal another 5 years. But the horizon is always before us, retiring from us. However, it is possible to set a goal too close, in which case you destroy the purpose of life. The significance of a thing is lost after the goal is attained. As a result, nations become powerful, then their purpose dies and they cease. In the process of becoming powerful, they persecute other nations. And the persecuted nations, having the desire to escape persecution, immediately unite in purpose. They have the will to live because their privilege of living has been attacked. That is why it is difficult to partition nations after war, and the heavy clouds of that difficulty have already gathered. The moment you work an injustice, you create purpose, which is the final righter of wrong. If you give away something belonging to someone else, you give that individual the will to live because you attack the right to life. Whereas if you reach a position of security and nothing attacks you, you promptly settle down to breaking up. Success breeds division, adversity breeds unity. We strengthen that which we afflict, we weaken that which we reward. Cicero said, "While it is difficult to bear the burden of adversity, it is almost impossible to carry the burden of success." We have these forces at work all the time, building problems within ourselves. Why do great fortunes usually die in the third generation? Because the second and third generations did not have to fight for them. That which is easy breeds weakness. That which is difficult challenges. There is nothing man has been able to devise as powerful as the environment which nature has created to challenge the human being to growth. It is a most magnificent program, one we must begin to think about. We must become aware of the significant motions that are vibrant through everything that we do. So we have in our life this tremendous force of intangibles, which is curiously related to the one fable we have perpetuated in generosity, the strange little man who lives at the North Pole. St. Nicholas, or Santa Claus, was originally Robin Hood Bishop, an old Christian bishop, and he was a character if there ever was one. He used to wander up and down the diocese collecting things in a curious sort of way. On visiting a baron, if he saw a nice-looking candlestick, when the baron bowed him out, the candlestick bowed out with him. Of course, he did not always do it just that way. Sometimes he convinced the baron it was good for him to make a gift of the candlestick, but if he did not show appropriate generosity, the candlestick had a way of disappearing. Now it was generally conceded throughout the diocese that the archbishop was an honorable man, that his character was above reproach, that his piety, integrity and honesty could not be questioned. It was just unfortunate that he suffered from a slight case of kleptomania, but that was quite understandable in a man of his great spiritual achievement. The shrewd old bishop had an interesting time because after a while it became more and more the local custom for various persons to put things out where he could find them, and he would think he was doing something very astute. But all the time the candlestick was put out where he could find it. Everyone entered into the little game and had a wonderful time, and he went home with the pockets of his robe bulging with the things he had taken. Then came the delicate issue of trying to give the candlestick to a needy family. But of course the candlestick had a background and history, so that did not work so well. It merely got the recipient into more trouble. Gradually, out of this difficulty, he evolved a way, the way of the secret source of good. He would find coins where they had been laid out for him, and with a full purse he would go out and visit his parishioners. When no one was looking, he would slip the coins to them or leave them where they would be found. If they asked him where they came from, he would say, "Probably an angel brought them. You needed them, and here they are." No one knew anything about it. It was a complete institution of secret giving, and one of the most interesting and dramatic stories of the early history of the Christian Church. After a long time, this old character became involved in an older tradition of secret giving, previously related to spirits, angels, and all kinds of mysterious creatures from the beginning of time. The Irish fairies, the gnomes and nymphs, the German folklore, the Arabian fables, all these stories were involved in the peasant belief, and it was always the story of how some spirit or sprite brought the gift instead of the human giver. This is present among the Indians in New Mexico, where they give little dolls to the children, telling them that the little dolls walk out of the mountains to them. It is a sort of fantasy, but a fantasy very deep in human nature. I think an old Indian gave me one of the best definitions in the world on this subject, one that we so-called highly civilized people would do well to consider. This old man said, yes, it is quite true, we make the little images and give them to the children, but really, do we? And I wonder if it is such a story to say that a spirit did it. I wonder if it is not true, whether in reality there is not a spirit that makes us do it, rather than ourselves. Maybe there is a Santa Claus. Maybe there is a Santa Claus that is in our consciousness, that we share, like a racial spirit or a creational spirit. Maybe the Buddha is right. Compassion is not an emotional manifestation, but a principle. And all those who feel compassion manifest the one compassion that exists in the world. Perhaps the virtue is the manifestation of the attributes of the gods. Perhaps our secret giving bears witness to a God of giving. It might be something to think about. Certainly we have always had it, and always felt awfully good when we obeyed its impulses, and felt rather sad when it was commercialized, because we have a sense of values about these things. Perhaps, as the old Indian expressed it, it is true the gods are the givers and human beings are only the way of delivering the goods. We do not really give them, we only deliver them. There is a deity, a spirit, a power in life that is the real giver. And our gifts come finally from the Son. The Son is the giver of all things, and we are merely the distributors of these universal benefactions. We are merely the agency serving the one great spirit of good. We should not really say, "It is I who gives," rather, "Through me it is given." The personality equation should be out of it. We have the privilege of being the channel for the free distribution of things. We all know what happens in this world of economics when a few people get too much money. We have a depression. Because wealth is only full when it is in circulation. When it is tied up in a few places, it is no longer wealth, it is poverty. It is the same way with our emotions and generosity. It is only what we give, what we keep in circulation that does us any good. Only that which we administer, that which we serve with, that has any virtue or value to us. Years ago, I talked with an old Mohammedan. Islam too has its festival of secret giving. I asked him what he considered the proper spirit of giving, and the old man said, according to our belief, all giving should be secret. The personal equation should be removed from all giving. We should never give so others will know we give. That is Islam. The delicacy of the gift is significant. We should only give in the name of the spirit of good, and that is more or less what Christmas means. That is the idea behind it. Of course, we cannot help being discovered as the giver, but it should not be our primary concern. Our primary purpose should not be that we give as a satisfaction to our egos, or that we should be known by our giving, but rather to have the joy of sharing what we have, and to do it in the most delicate manner possible. There is a story in Islam of the beggar who sat on the street corner collecting coins in a bowl. Someone said to him, "I suppose you know every generous man in town." He replied, "No, I do not. I know only the stingy ones, because every man who puts his coin in my bowl first covers his face." That is Islam. Our Christmas festival is related to this, to doing good simply in the name of a spirit, in the name of a power. Now, let us think of it in another way for a moment. Have you ever considered the collective thought power and its effect in the invisible world in nature? Have you ever realized, for instance, that in spiritualistic seances, characters who have never existed occasionally materialize, appear, and communicate? Of course, the physicist or physical scientist will say that is just proof of the fact that the entire problem is merely one of psychology, but that is not true. The truth of the matter is that anything we believe in and think about and visualize comes into existence in the astral light. It is perfectly possible for the Count of Monte Cristo to be a being, although he never lived. Because of the thousands of people who have read about his life and adventures, he has become a thought picture in the minds of people. Collective thought pictures become entities in the astral light. Now, these entities are only mental beings. They have no real life. They are shadows, like shadow forms upon the motion picture screen, thought into existence by the combined mental impulses of many minds. But would it be fair to say, because a motion picture is a shadow, it is not an influence? It is one of the greatest influences in our life, for good or evil. Would it be fair to say that a great work of art has no influence because it is not alive, since it is only a canvas or stone? That would be quite wrong. It has a profound influence. When Xerxes stood in the presence of the Olympian Zeus, he stopped the war and said, "I cannot look in the face of that statue and kill men." Yet it was only a statue, but you can see it did have power. And you can see that thought forms too have power if you could study and visualize the astral light on Christmas Eve. When millions of small children who believe in Santa Claus go to sleep thinking and dreaming about him, if you could study the thing from a more or less fourth-dimensional vista, you would have the privilege of seeing Santa Claus on Christmas Eve. You would see the complete image of the entire thing floating in the astral light, created out of the thought forms of individuals and capable of impinging itself upon the thought forms of other individuals. If your small child sometimes says to you that he saw Santa Claus, do not think it is imagination, except as it is the product of the mass imagination of the entire world. Remember, many things we consider facts are only mass imagination. It is quite possible and real that the mass thought should have a profound effect upon the life of the race. Certainly it is only a shadow, but you cannot think without thoughts becoming things. If you study this subject well, you will find many grave and serious questions of life answered in the same way. It is perfectly possible for a great power of good to be released upon the world through the simultaneous concentrated thought of people. It is quite possible for this to be a force capable of bringing about good. You are a little weary and tired at that time of the year. Then about Christmas time, something begins to stir in you. The old feeling comes back. You go out struggling with the old problem, outwardly resentful against it, but inwardly you will fight for it. Perhaps you have picked up something, picked up this thought. Perhaps it is because of this thought form you are what you have sworn you would never be again. Gullible at Christmas time. Just as men are picked up in the psychology of battle, so it is possible for men to be picked up by the mass psychology of beauty and manifest something of that spirit that has meant so much to the world from the beginning. To most of us, Santa Claus and Christmas are the window and door to something within our own consciousness, the realization of sharing, giving secretly. It is something that is very good, very important. and something by which we do become rather close to the gods who give all to mankind. So you play at being divine, and we hope you will play wisely and gently, that always with your giving you will be aware of the sacred privilege of sharing, and that every opportunity to give is a sacrament of sharing with life that which life has abundantly bestowed. If we had more of these fables and myths and less of what we call practical things, we would have a much better world. We will have them someday, and we will grow up. When we grow up, we will have a return of the fables and myths. They will be reborn again, and we shall discover the old stories which we believe to be nothing but nursery tales, to be stronger and more real than the greatest scientific knowledge of our day. We may discover the subtle overtones which can only be communicated in myths and fables because we have no words for them. But they are very real. They are the rededication to something vital to our own good. So in spite of inconveniences we go on, but it is a blessed thing we do. It is also good for us to think about these matters and try to learn through giving how to give. Remember, it is through the secret philosophy of sharing, through these experiences, that we perfect our own understanding as we go on. In order to make Christmas significant, each one in some way can experience the sacrament of giving as a restatement of the fact that, in spite of what goes on in the world, in spite of how much problems burden us and how responsibilities depress us, still in our hearts we can have the simple joy of a good deed, a reconsecration to generosity and kindly things. And in this coming year, as one great Christmas gift, let us more firmly resolve that in the year ahead, we will give more of the happiness in ourselves and less of our grief to others. Let us forgive everyone who we have felt has wronged us. Let us resolve that in giving we will not give anything that does not help, that we will not give negative gifts, not too much advice that may be very negative, but let us give strength, wisdom, and courage. Let us release from bondage to us those upon whom we have believed we have claims. Let us release everyone and everything we have held by unreasonable means. Let us realize that the only thing we can really give is opportunity, and let us give it abundantly. Let us make it a year in which we shall try to make our great gift to the world a constructive self-dedication to the service of others. If we do this, it will not only be an important Christmas, but a very important year in our lives. A public lecture by Manly Palmer Hall. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.